Hi, I'm Jessica the Museum Guide, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about the different Christmas witches and monsters found all throughout Europe. Now, you might already know about Krampus. He's kind of like St. Nicholas's dark alter ego, and I'll give him some airtime. But we're also going to talk about other monsters and witches that accompany St. Nick, including Belsnickel, Père Fouettard, and Hans Trapp, as well as the Italian La Befana. I'm also going to talk about a few outliers that don't have anything to do with St. Nicholas, including the wonderful and monstrous traditions of Iceland, Perchta from Germany, and a witch from this island, Gyre Carling from Scotland. Please note that a lot of these legends and creatures have dozens of names and variations, so if I didn't cover your favorite, let me know in the comment section below. As always, if you like my channel, please follow and remember to hit the like button. It really helps. Now first, let's start here in London. Right now, I'm walking through Winter Wonderland, where you'll see a lot of queues and revelers. However, the longest line is in front of a peculiar attraction, especially for the time of year, the haunted house. Yes, a haunted house at Christmas, and it's not just a gimmick. We love to be scared this time of year. That's not a new phenomenon. For at least a millennium, this time of year has been associated with spooky creatures, strange rituals, monsters, and witches. Here's some footage of me and my good friend Kalena experiencing the haunted house, getting our cheap scares, and having a blast. Now, this is a magical time of year, quite literally. It's no secret that our modern Christmas celebrations have their roots in ancient pagan traditions. Kissing under the mistletoe, bringing a tree inside, and lighting the Yule log all have their origins in ancient Roman and Norse mythology. After all, the winter solstice is the shortest day in the northern hemisphere, and people all over have marked this date with rituals, festivals, and superstitions. And sure, this is a season of family, feasting, and decorations. Watch my video on the Museum of the Home to see more, but it's also a season of fright and horror. Don't see the connection? Allow me to explain. We like to be scared at Christmas. Think about all of the horror movies set this time of year. Black Christmas, Gremlins, even Dickens' famous Christmas Carol is a ghost story. By the way, my favorite Christmas horror movie is called Deep Red or Profondo Rosso. What's yours? Tell me in the comments below. Now, the connection between horror and Christmas really makes sense if you think about it. Late nights, candlelight, mystery, wonder, songs sung in minor keys, they can all easily slip into uncertainty and even fear. There is always an element of darkness at Christmas time. Let's start by talking about the origins of some of these creatures. All over the continent, pagan festivals were transmogrified into Christian traditions as a way to make this new holiday more palatable to wary followers. As a result, some of the pre-Christian traditions, like the aforementioned mistletoe and Yule log, get a pseudo-Christian makeover and are allowed to stay. For instance, the 8th century Northumbrian monk Bede briefly mentions a heathen festival called Modranacht, Mother's Night, that took place on 24th December. Sadly, he doesn't tell us any more about these ceremonies, but some scholars have linked Mother's Night to different sacrificial rituals and Germanic female deities. Just one instance of a witchy tradition on Christmas, but there are many others. For instance, in the Orava region of Slovakia, people used to splash water around their homes to protect it from witches during the year ahead. To this day, Norwegian families hide brooms and mops on Christmas Eve to prevent witches from taking to the skies and causing festive mayhem. And similarly, an Italian-American superstition states that any woman born at midnight on Christmas Eve will become a witch. Even the seemingly innocuous baubles hanging on our tree might have a witchy connection. Some say they are derived from witch balls, which were glass balls popular in the 18th century, hung around the house to ward off witches. As you can see, the connection between Christmas and witches isn't as far of a stretch as you might think. If you know of any other witchy traditions around this time of year, leave them in the comment section below. Now, if you've only ever heard of one Christmas monster, it's likely Krampus. He's been increasing in popularity outside of his native Austria over the past few decades, with the horror movie franchise the most notable sign of his notoriety. Krampus is the dark companion of St. Nicholas, who I explain in detail in my Museum of the Home video, linked just above. St. Nicholas rewards good children with gifts and candy on December 6th, which is his saint's day. However, Krampus is his hell-bound counterpart, known by many names across the continent, such as Knecht Ruprecht, Bartel, Parken, Schmutzli, Rumpelklaas, and many others. He has horns, dark hair, and long fangs with a lolling tongue, and he waves a chain and bell to cause a lot of racket. While St. Nicholas rewards good children with sweets and small gifts, Krampus carries a bunch of birch sticks so he can hit misbehaving children, and then he shoves the children into his sack and drags them down into hell. I mean, festive? Not really. His name is derived from the German word Krampen, which means claw, and he's often thought to be the son of the Norse god Hel, with some additions from Greek mythology like the goat hooves of satyrs and fauns. Krampus actually has his own holiday in Germanic countries, Krampusnacht, and he arrives on the night of December 5th, the evening before St. Nicholas Day, to assess the children and decide who he will snatch away to the underworld. After being banned by the Catholic Church and repressed by various governments, Krampus is having a big comeback around the world. In a more modern take, which you can see here, people over Austria, Germany, Hungary, Slovenia, and the Czech Republic, and increasingly further afield, dress up in elaborate costumes for a Krampuslauf, or Krampus run, to drink and chase people through the streets. Let me know in the comments if you've ever been to a Krampuslauf. Now, if you're a fan of The American Office, you already know about Belsnickel. Or maybe you're from Pennsylvania, or you're German or Swiss. In the American Office Christmas episode, Dwight Schrute, played by Rainn Wilson, dresses up in a furry hat and an oversized coat, smearing coal on his face and wearing a beard filled with sticks and twigs. Now, you might have thought this was a gag just for the show, but that's a pretty accurate representation of the German Yule figure. Today, Belsnickel is most popular in Pennsylvania, dating back to the earliest German and Swiss settlers in the 18th century. Many of the existing European settlers were Quakers, and so they didn't celebrate Christmas. But the new German and Swiss settlers brought Christmas trees, caroling, and of course, Belsnickel. If Krampus is the dark side of St. Nicholas and St. Nicholas is a gift giver, we can think of Belsnickel as a mix of the two. He passes judgment on the spot and gives out gifts to good children, but he tortures those who have misbehaved. Even if you lie to Belsnickel, he knows when you've been naughty. Sound familiar? Now, I should note that Belsnickel is very similar to Père Fouettard, who is French for Father Whipper. He too accompanies St. Nicholas on his rounds, and he either gives naughty children lumps of coal or just straight up beats them. This legend dates to around 1250 and can get quite gruesome, with Père Fouettard drugging bad children, slitting their throats, and stewing them in a barrel. I mean, this stuff makes QAnon look tame. In the legend, St. Nicholas resurrected these children and then made Père Fouettard his partner or his assistant as a punishment for his crimes. Both of these seem like a really poorly thought out plan. Now, in the 1930s, oddly enough, Père Fouettard experienced a brief surge in popularity in America, where he was called Father Flog or Spanky, and he had a female accomplice called Mother Flog. They weren't associated with Christmas, but they did dole out horrible punishments for misbehavior, such as cutting out a child's tongue for lying. Merry Christmas! Now let's move on to Hans Trapp, often called the dreaded Christmas scarecrow. Like Krampus, Père Fouettard, and Belsnickel, Hans Trapp is an anti-Saint Nick who tortures and even eats naughty children. He hails from the French-German border regions of Alsace and Lorraine, and he was likely inspired by the real-life Hans van Trotha, a knight who lived from 1450 to 1503. The legend states that the Pope soon banished him from Alsace, so he moved to Bavaria, where he developed a taste for human flesh. He began to disguise himself as a scarecrow so he could trap unwitting children, and he successfully snared a local shepherd's son. After cutting him to pieces and roasting him on a fire, he was then killed by a divine lightning bolt. To this day, children are still warned about Hans Trapp. However, he often appears with his luminous counterpart, Christkindl. She is there to soothe the children who have just been terrorized by Hans Trapp. She wears a long white dress and a crown with 4 candles, and she has her own helper when she hands out spice bread and sweets. Peckeressel, a magical Christmas donkey. Children leave him wreaths of hay on their doorstep on Christmas Eve. Here you can see Hans Trapp and Christkindl together. Now for our first Christmas witch, Befana. She's a kinder, more Christmassy witch, and she hails from Italy, and her name likely comes from the feast of the Epiphany on 6th January, while others think she's a modern version of the Roman goddess Strania. On Epiphany Eve, she takes sweets to children all over Italy. Oh, she's even tied in with biblical references. Some say that the 3 wise men took shelter with her on their way to the baby Jesus. Befana was so taken by their request that she tried to follow them, but she couldn't find the Magi. So instead, she hopped on her broomstick, naturally, and took sweets to all of the children she could find, sliding down their chimneys. In the Italian city of Urbania, there is still an annual La Befana festival, and more than 40,000 people attend every year. While Befana brings candy to good children, she brings a lump of coal to the bad children, and she's also an excellent housekeeper, so she always sweeps up the floor of your house before leaving. Some even think that the sweeping does away with the problems of the past year, so she's welcome at mine anytime. Just like Santa, many families leave a small glass of wine and a plate of snacks out for Befana. However, if you do catch a glimpse of her, beware. She might thump you with her broomstick because she likes to remain unseen. Frau Perchta is another Austrian-German legend, and she certainly isn't as sweet as Befana. In fact, she's commonly associated with Krampus. Historically, Frau Perchta was also known as Berchta or Bertha, and she's associated with the Scandinavian god Frigga because of her obsession with spinning and domesticity. She has a beaky big nose made of iron, dresses in rags, carries a walking stick, and generally looks like a down-at-heel old woman. However, she has a long knife hidden in her skirt. Because it's Christmas, so why not, I guess. Frau Perchta wants to check out your home and ensure it is neat and tidy, and make sure all of your flax is spun by 12th night, the feast of the Epiphany. If your home isn't neat, or your work at the loom is incomplete, or you haven't left her a traditional bowl of porridge, she'll come traipsing through your house and even set your loom on fire. And that's not the worst part. If you're particularly messy, she'll also disembowel you and replace your guts with rocks and straw. While Krampus is out and about on December 5th, the night before St. Nicholas Day, Perchta is associated with Epiphany, and you might see her swooping through the sky at night, accompanied by the souls of unbaptized children. You might also see her on the last 3 Thursdays before Christmas, which are also known as Berchtel nights or knocking nights. Sometimes you'll see Frau Perchta referred to as Holla, which means bright or shining. That's because she is associated with Epiphany, which is also known as Shining Night. The dual nature of the pretty Perchta and the ugly Perchta can often be seen on display at a Perchtenlauf or Perchtenrun. And let's be honest, the ugly Perchta is way cooler. Now here's an unexpected Alpine Scottish connection, the Gyre Carling. She's a Scottish witch, or sometimes called a fairy, and she shares a lot in common with Frau Perchta. She too has a long nose, although it isn't made of iron, and she's obsessed with spinning. She's another witch designed specifically to punish women during the holiday season. If you haven't finished spinning your flax by January 6th, she'll beat you with an iron club. Which is slightly nicer than disemboweling you. What a kindness on Christmas. No, wait, she might also eat you. Let's head to Iceland, which has its own truly unhinged Christmas traditions. We'll start with Gryla, whose name means growler in English. She's the matriarch of all the creatures I'm about to talk about. Gryla is an ogress who lives in an ice cave, and she boils naughty children alive and then eats them. As far back as the 13th century, she was described as having, quote, 40 tails, a bag on her back, a sword in her hand, coming to carve out the stomachs of children. She is also described as having bad nails on each finger, eyes in the back of her head, and goat-like horns with a bearded chin and blackened teeth. By the 19th century, Gryla gains a second husband, Lepaludi. She ate her first husband, of course. Together, she and Lepaludi have 20 children, the 13 Yule Lads plus 7 more, and sometimes even more than that, with a complicated family tree of stepchildren and half-siblings. The Yule Lads torment children and pester families. Together they also own a giant cat, who I'll talk about shortly. The earliest Yule celebrations were a time to gather with family, but also a time for elves, trolls, and other spooky creatures. Characters like Gryla were embellished in stories, but would also appear in the flesh, in the form of masked figures and costume revelers, similar to our own British traditions of mummering. And you might even run into Gryla in the streets of Reykjavik to this day. You can think of her as a personification of the darkness and frigidity of the winter. She is at one with the harsh landscape, and she is cruel and punishing, a stand-in for the trials and tribulations of living in such an unforgiving climate. Now that we've spoken about Gryla, we need to speak more about her rambunctious troll sons, the 13 Yule Lads. The lads first appear around the 18th century, but by 1746 the government had to enact a law to prevent parents from scaring their children too much with stories about them. Now, the lads used to be less distinct, but a popular 1932 poem by Johannes Ur Kotlum gave them more individualized personalities. So here we go. Here's all 13 of the lads. Sheepcoat Clod, he suckles from ewes in farmer sheep's sheds. Gullygawk, he sneaks the foam off the top of milking buckets. Stubby, he reaches up to steal food from frying pans. Spoon licker, he licks spoons when you're not looking. Pot licker, he licks the unwashed pots. My dog does this when the dishwasher is open. Bowl licker, the same again for bowls. There's lots of licking going on here. Door slammer, he slams doors and stomps around. Skyr gobbler, he eats all of the Icelandic yogurt called skyr. Sausage swiper, steals sausages. Window peeper, a peeping Tom who likes to steal. Door sniffer, with his huge nose he sniffs at your door to detect baked goods. Meat hook, he steals your smoked lamb and other hanging meats. And finally, the candle beggar, always after your candles, especially important in a dark Icelandic winter. I can't lie, while some of this is pretty innocuous, a lot of these lads are very creepy, and we're looking at you, window peeper. There was a real attempt in the 20th century to make these characters more palatable, to kind of sanctify them. The Yule Lads got friendlier faces, bushier beards, and even red and white fur costumes. However, over the past few decades, Icelandic people have become more passionate about protecting their language and customs. Led by the National Museum, the whole country has banded together to return the Yule Lads to their traditional roots, getting them back in their ragged wool clothing and making them more gruff and fearsome. They each appear in the museum during the 12 days before Christmas Eve. Let me know if you'd like me to visit the museum next Christmas. Come on, twist my arm, make me go to Reykjavik. Let's finish our tour of the Christmas witches with the terrifying Jólakötturinn, or Yule Cat. Before the 19th century, he was also a standalone character, but today he lives with Gryla and the Yule Lads. He's not a normal cat, though. He's a giant, for one thing, and he eats people who haven't received new clothes before Christmas, which has given rise to the Icelandic tradition of wearing new socks on Christmas Eve. Jólakötturinn spends his day roaming the countryside, looking for victims and making sure everyone is warm and cozy in their new clothes at Christmas time. He actually has kind of a practical purpose, as Iceland began exporting much of its wool in the Middle Ages. Since the Yule Cat only attacks people who haven't received new clothes, he emphasizes the importance of wool production. And this leads me to an interesting final thought. Traditions only continue when they serve the population, so they tend to have practical rationales and boost morale. Think about it. All of these frightening Christmas creatures serve a purpose. They keep your wife spinning her flax, your children well behaved, and your wool production high. It might not be healthy by our modern standards, but using fear to motivate the community is very, very effective, and also leads to the need for therapy. So let me know if you'd like me to visit Freud's house here in London in the new year. We're all gonna need him after this video. Well, that's it for our explanation of Europe's Christmas monsters and witches. I can't wait to hear what you think about it in the comments below. I'll see you the next time I'm in the museum. Have a Merry Christmas and a splendid Krampusnacht.